Hello there, my name is Richard Reeves. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, where I direct our Future at the Middle Class initiative, and I'm also director of our new project on boys and men. I'm delighted to welcome you to this event today, a hugely important event, we think, on the creation of a new body, the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys. This was a commission that was established with bipartisan legislation at the end of 2020. And it is specifically focused on the economic, social, and other challenges that are faced by Black boys and men in this country. It's going to be part of the Office of Civil Rights and is going to contain members of government as well as appointees from outside. The commission is underway, and you're going to hear from the director of the commission a little bit later. But first, we're going to have conversations with some of the legislative leads for this initiative. And I'm going to start with Senator Marco Rubio, who's really been leading this effort on the Senate side, following some similar work that he's actually done in Florida. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Senator Rubio to the virtual Brookings stage. Senator Rubio, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
And thanks for your leadership of this work as well, Senator. Given that this is a bipartisan effort on this very specific group, Black boys and men, could you say a little bit about why that has become so important to you as a policy issue? It seems like it has been both back at home, if you like, but also at a national level. What is it about this specific group that you think has warranted the creation of such a commission?
So I think that, first of all, it's important to point out, as you already have, that when I was in the state legislature, we actually created one commission like this for Florida, which is active and operating. And I did it with then State Senator Frederica Wilson, who now is Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who is also my counterpart in the House in our creation of this last year at the federal level. And I think there's two reasons why this is important. And the first is it goes to the identity of our country as a nation where we believe, it is in our founding principles, that all people are created with inherent rights to life, to liberty, to pursue happiness, to achieve success as they define it. And second, because the reality of it is that we're in a great power competition right now with China. They have three times as many people as we do. We can't afford to leave anyone behind. So for those two reasons, it's essential for us anytime we identify any group of Americans who face some disproportionate amount of challenges or underperformance, be they economic, educational, or social, to identify why it is that that's happening and what are the possible ways to address it. And obviously not all of that falls on government, but just to truly understand it beyond the anecdotal, beyond the political, beyond guesswork, to actually have serious people look at it on a consistent, ongoing basis and define it is to me critical of being able to solve. But the bottom line is that across every metric, African-American men and boys are underperforming the general population in terms of marriage rates, in terms of family formation, in terms of income, educational achievement, and they're overrepresented in our criminal justice system. So why is that? What is the answer to it? What are the component aspects of our society that are leading to that outcome, and what could possibly be done to begin to address it? But addressing anything begins with awareness of it.
Right, and that's clearly going to be an important part of the commission. How important do you think it is that this is a bipartisan effort? Because obviously issues around race and racial justice can get politicized quite quickly, but this has been established under bipartisan representation, and it was in Florida too, and obviously, so that's interesting because this is a debate that can be quite polarizing. So, from your perspective, what additional value do you think comes from the fact that this has been established in this very bipartisan way?
Well, and we need to keep it that way because the practical truth is that anything that becomes partisan in this country immediately splits our country in half. We are deeply polarized. And so we struggle to make progress and advances and achieve anything on topics that are polarizing, both because of the nature of our political system, the way our legislative branch, for example, is structured at the state and federal level, and then also because societally, it's hard to rally people around something if they believe it's a cause that it only matters to one side, and therefore you have to be on the opposite side of it. So I think this is critical. This truly goes, again, I think every American, no matter how you're registered to vote or what your ideology might be, everyone should be concerned that there is a segment of our population that from a statistical standpoint is not achieving to their full potential for some reason. And we need to identify what those reasons are and then begin to address them to the extent government can.
So as you point out, the metrics speak to some extent for themselves when you do start breaking the data down in this way. And in fact, my colleague Camille Bousset, who is moderating, is on a panel later, is really set out this new deal for Black men in particular. Are there issues that jump out to you particularly? So when we do that, when you look at it in that way, and we look at this very specific group, like a small group of the population, if we're going to break by Black and by gender, are there things that either initially or now really are the ones that made you sit up and think, okay, this is a very different kind of problem. This isn't just a difference of degree, this is a difference of kind in terms of the inequalities faced by this group? Because you're right, it's across the board, but which are the ones that really stick out to you?
Well, let me describe it this way. Look, there are racists, unfortunately, in every society in the world, and that includes our own, and that's certainly always going to be a factor. There are people out there that simply don't like people that look different than them, and that's an unfortunate feature of our human nature, and obviously our laws should not contain any of that. But that's not the only thing. There are also, I think, indifference or being unaware of what life is like for other people for a lot of different reasons is a big problem. The truth of the matter is, and I continue to say it, we still have an inordinate number of people in positions of authority who are not bad people. They just honestly are not aware or don't fully appreciate some of these challenges. So just to give you a very practical example, right? Let's say you're a young man, and whether it's African-American, Hispanic, or from any background, but you go to school, you're being raised by your grandmother because your mom's working 2 jobs and your dad's never been a part of your life. You live in a dangerous neighborhood and in substandard housing. You go to the public school that the government makes you go to, but in that school, you don't really have access to much of all the opportunity. You don't know anything about internships. You couldn't afford it anyway, or study abroad for that matter. When the time comes to take a standardized test, you can't afford the expensive courses that people are taking to increase their SAT or ACT scores enough to get them into school. So there's a whole world out there that you're not even exposed to. And look, I don't face even half of the challenges that many today face, but I didn't have any internships or study abroad opportunities growing up. My parents couldn't afford it and the like. And then when the time comes to get into college or later on apply for a job, that your resume, no matter how smart and talented you are, doesn't stack up because you're competing against people that have spent years with internships and study abroad and all kinds of opportunities that you may not even be aware of. That's an impediment. It's one of the reasons why, one of the things I've been supportive of is school choice, not because I'm anti-public schools. I went to public schools, and I think public schools, like in South Florida, where I live, some of the best public schools in America are public schools in South Florida. But I also have seen firsthand, not because I read about it, I've seen firsthand someone be taken through an opportunity scholarship, which is funded through corporate donations to step up for kids in Florida, be able to go to a private school or a school of their parents' choice where they are exposed to all kinds of things that expand their horizons. Suddenly they realize there's this whole other world out there, job and career opportunities that they may never have been aware of had their life been isolated to, just the 15, 20 square blocks of their neighborhood and their local community. That is a life-changing opportunity. It suddenly sparks all sorts of interest. I've seen it happen over and over again. People who never thought about becoming an engineer or a pilot or going into the service academies or going into whatever, law or science, whatever it may be, because they didn't even know that those jobs existed because they don't know anyone whose job has jobs like that. To me, that's extraordinarily important. And it's one of those things that I think are underappreciated. How much value that has in young people's lives to be exposed to those opportunities and to expand horizons early on.
Yeah, I also think that's a great example, Senator, of the ends and the means, if you like. If the end is to improve outcomes for Black men and boys, then we can then have an argument about the means. Is that through more school choice? Is it through other kinds of investments and so on? But it becomes an argument about what works rather than kind of ideologically inflected. Couple more questions just before we let you go, Senator. The first question is just about this specific focus on men and boys, which is not entirely uncontroversial in some circles. I'm interested to know what your view is about the specific challenges that Black boys and men might face, but by extension, perhaps other boys and men might face too, as a result of being boys and men. So in other words, I think the standard narrative is we think in binaries, men doing better than women, white people doing better than Black and Hispanic people, etc. But here you're cutting across that, and you're saying there might be something specific about being a man, being male actually, that is not to your advantage, at least for some boys and men. Do you think that's true? And can you think of examples of where it actually kind of goes the other way, particularly for this group?
Sure. I don't think anyone lives in a vacuum, right? So what impacts men ultimately impacts women. What impacts fathers ultimately impacts their children, whether they're boys or girls. What impacts a husband ultimately impacts a wife. And so the reason why we're so focused on that acutely is because there are some unique aspects to the challenges that Black men and boys face in terms of like the incarceration rate, the early interaction with the criminal justice system, which is stigmatizing. Yeah, again, I go back to this point. And so it's complicated because it doesn't fit neatly in the box of, is it racism in terms of 1960s style racism, or is it just indifference? But so I'll give you a real world example, right? So I know a 16-year-old young man has been around my son his whole life and lives in a challenging neighborhood. And he had an unfortunate interaction with the criminal justice system. Now, had we not gotten involved, he would have been represented in that juvenile justice system by a public defender type individual, and he probably would have been asked to plead to some sort of offense, which would have then become part of his record. Had that same offense, which was not a big one, been committed by someone whose father and mother have professional salaries and attending, they would have hired a really good lawyer who once used to be a prosecutor and basically got the thing dismissed with the agreement of sealing the records and some sort of community service. That right there at 16, 17, 18 years of age is a major diversion point in the lives of two people, simply because one of them could afford or knew about or had access to a different outcome than somebody else. And those circumstances seem to be more acute and chronic, by the way, in African-American boys and men than in the population in general. And it has a direct impact ultimately on the well-being of women, be they their daughters, their wives, or their partners and spouses. And so, that's why we chose to focus on it that way. Obviously, it's modeled after what we did in Florida that has been highly successful. And frankly, some of the biggest supporters of this effort have been African-American women leaders in the community who point to this. I would point to something Frederica Wilson started with 5,000 role models, used to be 500 role models of excellence in South Florida, which seeks to partner young Hispanic and African-American males with role model figures in the community that look like them, come from where they came from, and have achieved success as a way of saying, you can be anything you really want to be, and here's how to get there.
Thank you. My last question to you, Senator, is about what success looks like. So you've already, I think, started going down this road. I also think, by the way, that example of criminal justice is a great example of how you have a problem that's specific to Black boys and men, or disproportionately affecting them, but has spillover effects for everybody else. As you say, we don't live in a vacuum. But I was going to ask you what success would look like for the commission, but let's be a bit more ambitious and say, what would success look like more broadly for this issue? What's the world look like that the commission is helping to kind of point us towards? How will we know? When will you wake up and feel like, okay, we've really made some progress on this issue?
So let me give you a real world example again. Another young man that we've known since he's like 8 or 9 years of age, when my son and he been playing together in the same sports teams and parks and so forth since they were 8 or 9 years old. They're now both close to 17 years of age. This young man, in my opinion, is a genius. Unfortunately, he's to this point in his life used that genius for things like counterfeiting and drug sales and illegality. But it didn't have to be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way. And he has some unique aspects of his background. He lives again in a very tough neighborhood, which he wishes he didn't have to go to every night. His brother was killed a few years ago by a group that killed him because he happens to live 2 blocks away in a different building. That's what the fight is over. And now he's been a consistent target. He's a big, strong kid, which makes him an even bigger target. And he sort of turned to this behavior, both because he sees it as the most immediate and effective application of his genius and ambition. He has ambition and he has ability, but the only horizon he sees before him that fits within the paradigm of where he lives is that one. Success looks like him instead, not just living in a better and safer neighborhood, but being in an academic and educational and social environment where he has the opportunity to apply that genius to something productive, not destructive. And that's a hard thing to do, but we have to do it. And because if we don't, then this, what I believe is a genius young man, his gifts, his talents will be stolen from the country, not to mention just the personal tragedy, but the country will be deprived of the unique skills and talents of an individual who's an American. And we just can't afford it in this time in our history. We need everyone. We can't afford to leave anyone behind.
I really like the way you've ended there on what the wonks would call an asset model rather than a deficit model, Senator, of saying that there is a reservoir of talent here which can sometimes be misdirected, but which we need to tap into, and that's very often being left on the table, as you said at the beginning. Well, with that, Senator, I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much for your leadership of this work, and thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for paying attention to it. I appreciate it.
So I want to thank Senator Rubio for those remarks, and to Richard Reeves and his colleagues in economic studies for their hard work on this event. I'm Dr. Rayshawn Ray. I'm a senior fellow in governance studies here at the Brookings Institution. It is my distinct pleasure now to introduce Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who represents Florida's 24th Congressional District. You heard Senator Rubio referencing her a few times during his remarks. And I just want to take a quick minute to highlight some of the work that she's done over the years that really speaks to getting to this point, because she's been one of the primary drivers on this type of work. Not only can we think about Miami-Dade County and that particular area in Broward County as well, being one of the most ethnically and culturally diverse, but also we can recognize Congresswoman Wilson for the work that she's done serving in the U.S. House of Representatives after earning a Bachelor of Science degree in elementary education from Fisk University, go my home state of Tennessee, and then a Master of Science degree in elementary education from the University of Miami, where she's originally from. She started being a teacher and then became a principal, and then quickly rose up the ranks to being recognized as one of President George H.W. Bush's America 2000 in terms of thinking about the plan for upgrading national education standards. As a former educator, an elementary school teacher, a community leader, school board member, state legislature, and founder of the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence Project, Congresswoman Wilson earned a reputation as, quote, the voice for the voiceless. As a ranking member in the Education and Workforce Protection Subcommittee, she's done tons of work, including focusing on the American Jobs Act, the Student Loan Borrower Bill of Rights, the Youth Corp Act of 2013, and then also focusing on a host of things that we know are pertinent to Americans, from dealing with homeowners, insurance premium, crime prevention and violence, foster care, and then even defending women in Haiti and Nigeria from gender-based violence. And then, quite relevant to our discussion here, is in May 2015, Congresswoman Wilson was appointed to the advisory council of then President Barack Obama's My Brother's Keeper Alliance, which was a public acknowledgement of the life-changing results for boys and young men of color that she's received from her work on the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence project. President Barack Obama cited her program as being the impetus for thinking about My Brother's Keeper. And then, of course, Congresswoman Wilson went on to be the founding chair of the Congressional Black Caucus's My Brother's Keeper Task Force. It is my pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Wilson, who will give us some remarks now.
Thank you so much, Rashawn. What a wonderful introduction. Thank you. I appreciate it so much. I want to say good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and hello to everyone here. I'm Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. I'm the founder and also the chair of the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys. And you need to know that we have declared the year 2022, 2023 as the year of Black men and boys. And we want the Brookings Institute, and I know that Mr. the Brookings people are all here, and I want Mr. Richard, for sure, Mr. Richard Reeves, to help us amplify that message. I am the founder of, and I guess the #1 volunteer for the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence Project. It's a dropout prevention program that I founded in Miami-Dade County Public Schools 30 years ago. I really founded it at my little elementary school. And when I was elected to the school board, I put it in all of the schools in Miami-Dade County. So thousands of men mentor young boys all over Florida during the school day, from 3rd grade to 12th grade. And then we actually send them to college, or we send them to the military, or we support them in the next level of life. In turn, they return back to Miami, back to Florida, all over Florida, and they are mentors themselves in the school district. The oldest is probably 55 years old. And our goal has always been to interrupt the school to prison pipeline. I want to thank the Brookings Institution and all who have chosen to participate in today's conversation for your commitment to improving the life outcomes of Black males in America. I want to thank my dear friend, Senator Marco Rubio, for his remarks today and his support in the Senate to pass this transformative commission on the social status of Black men and boys. Mr. Rubio serves as a mentor in the role models, and our Senator Scott also helps with this initiative in the state of Florida. For several years prior to the passing, I fought in Congress to establish the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys. But before even coming to Congress in Florida, I passed the Florida Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys, and it is currently very much alive and well. In fact, my son, my personal son, because I have so many all over the United States, but my blood son serves on the commission in Florida, and they do work all over Florida. You know, when we passed the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys, when it was actually voted upon, they were ushering Congressman John Lewis's body into the Capitol for viewing. And he was one of the fiercest advocates of Black men and boys. Congressman John Lewis and I attended Fisk University together. So we have been friends. We were friends for generations. And I'm just saddened that he was not aware that it was passed. But I know that he is beaming with pride that this commission, the first policy passed by Congress to specifically address Black men and boys, is working to study the various issues impacting Black men and boys. And we're going to provide policy recommendations to members of the Congressional Black Caucus to file as bills to improve the lives of America's Black males. And we can hardly wait to go to work. It is no secret that being Black and male in America is not easy. And when I founded the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence, little girls would say to me, Mrs. Wilson, you're always doing something for the boys. when are you going to do something for the girls? And I would say to them, you may think that this is for the boys, but this is for you. I am building you good, strong husbands and good, strong fathers for your children. So when they see me now in Miami, in Jacksonville, in Orlando, all over Florida, they say, Miss Wilson, my boyfriend is a member of the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence, and he's going to college thanks to you. Despite historic gains made in the last 50 years, Black males across the United States and from all walks of life face significant conditions and challenges in life's biggest areas. Number one, education. And I guess education and criminal justice would be tied. Healthcare, employment, fatherhood, mentorship, and violence. And perhaps the most dangerous issue facing Black men and boys in America is racism itself. When a little baby is born, the doctor brings the baby to the mother and says, Miss Wilson, it's a boy, and places that baby on the mother's breast. He doesn't say, Mrs. Wilson, it's a murderer. Mrs. Wilson, it's a robber. Mrs. Wilson, it's a gang member. He said, Miss Wilson, it's a boy. So what happens to that little beautiful Black baby boy from birth to age 13, sometimes 12 and 14, who have the courage to pick up a gun and rain terror in their community? That doesn't have to be. We can stop that. And we have solutions. And this is the role of this commission, to raise up these little Black boys so that they can become good men in society and not a menace to society. Too often, Black boys are perceived as criminals by a young age. In contrast to their white counterparts, they are labeled as delinquents, not rowdy. They are perceived as hardened criminals, not misguided youth. The very existence of Black males is far too often seen as a threat. And unfortunately, Black men and boys have been subjected to poor, unjust treatment as a result. When a car drives up to a corner and a Black boy is there, people begin to lock the car doors. When you are approaching a Black boy on a sidewalk, many people cross the street. When a young Black boy gets on an elevator, some people actually get off. The outcome of this treatment are reflected in the social outcomes of areas like education, criminal justice, and employment. And the statistics speak for themselves. More than 1 out of every 6 Black men who today should be between 25 and 54 years old have disappeared from daily life. They're either dead, in prison, in jail. So many have been wounded in gunfights. They're disabled. in nursing homes. And the healthcare disparities, some are in nursing homes that you would think only the elderly would be suffering like this. Low rates of high school retention among Black male students directly relate to the high rates of joblessness and incarceration, or should I say high rates of high school, high rates of in-school retention, and low rates of high school retention. More than 2/3 of Black male dropouts end up serving time in state or federal prison. And while Black males overall make up roughly 13% of the US population, they represent nearly 30% of all men serving time in state and federal prisons. And that's a shame. And we must remember who that Black man is. Black men played such an integral role of establishing our nation's capital. And every time I walk across the street from our office building, I look up at the steeple on the top of the Capitol. And I remind myself that Black men, Black slaves, built the Capitol. They didn't have cranes the way we have today. They didn't have tall ladders now like they had. They didn't have that. They had ladders, but they weren't as tall as the steeple. So Black slave males at the top of the ladder had to form human ladders, and they would fall to their death. And at the end of the day, they would dig a mass grave and put the Black men who fell to their death in it. And then they would go back to another plantation and get a new work crew for the next day. No explanation to the wife or to the spouse or to the children, just daddy never came back home. Black men built the White House. And the other day, I had the opportunity to visit with the President of the United States. And I told him this very same saga. And we want him involved in this commission. We want him involved because we need to amplify that this commission actually exists, that this commission is working for a solution that impacts every Black family in America, because every Black family in America has a Black boy, a Black man, a Black nephew, a Black uncle, a Black father, a Black son, a Black brother who is embroiled in some manner with the criminal justice system. I have two little cousins, they're not little anymore, that are in and out of jail. And I didn't know about it because the family kept it from me for a while. But I know that every single member of the African-American community, every family is faced with this issue. So what do we do because of that? We can't just let this continue. We have to find solutions. My next door neighbor is a rabbi, and we have conversations all of the time. And he knows what I do. He knows my passion. And he has said to me so many times, Congresswoman, if this were little Jewish boys, oh, no way. We would have found a solution and the federal government would be all in it. So that is the role of the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys and the Brookings Institute. And Rashawn, you're going to be right in the middle of it, right with Mr. Reeves as we find these solutions. And you are our partners from this point on. And that is why the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys is so necessary. Since its establishment, the Commission has held 2 public meetings, and I'm honored to have been voted as chair and the Reverend Al Sharpton as secretary. We only have 2 officers. So the commissioners voted us as chair and secretary. The issue of Black men and boys is not partisan. We had so many members of the Senate to sign on to the bill in the Senate, and the bill passed after the murder of George Floyd. So I think the entire nation had a connection to that horrendous murder. And people's hearts began to pump and say, what can we do? So I give honor to George Floyd because his murder was the impetus for this bill to pass. And I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, or undecided. You know what is happening with Black men and boys. Black males are dying every day in our communities, and we should all be concerned with the alarming issues that disproportionately affect them. With the commission now in place, advocates of Black men and boys like yourselves can work with us as we conduct the critical work of studying the societal forces that have disproportionately impacted Black males in America, with the intent to make recommendations to address them. And we have 5 members of the Congressional Black Caucus on the commission who can turn your recommendations into actual policy and bills and advocate for them in the House and the Senate and put them into law. That is what we plan to do as a commission. And this commission's founding, and with us amplifying it today, and hopefully the White House amplifying it, this country will receive the attention, respect, and long overdue support that they deserve, these Black men deserve, to make it in America. Hopefully, our amplification and working together will help every Black family in America, because this issue impacts every single Black family in America. So today, I look forward to hearing from the esteemed group of panelists, and one of them serves on the commission, Dr. Marshall. I'm so proud of him. And our very own commission program manager, Dr. Marvin Williams, who is new to this job and has been doing an amazing job. We're so proud that Commissioner Marshall and Marvin Williams will be speaking today. I hope our conversation and the questions received from the public will help shed light on the issue we as a commission should work to examine and to uplift and to pass legislation. I want to thank all of you, and especially the Brookings Institute. I am so proud and so pleased to be partnering with you. I know your history, and it's phenomenal. Thank you once again to everyone for being here today and having the willingness to learn and do more for America's Black men and boys. Thank you so much. And I yield back.
Representative Wilson, thank you. Thank you so much for those remarks. I think the way that you framed the discussion about what the disparities are, and then what some of the avenues we can take to do what Richard was saying earlier, kind of build an asset model of policies that advance some of these issues, is exactly what we're trying to do here at Brookings, and we know that you all are doing on the commission. What I want to do now is just take a few minutes to quickly introduce our panelists and just continue the conversation. I'm joined by an esteemed group of panelists that you heard from Congresswoman Wilson. First, Dr. Camille Bousset, who's a senior fellow here at the Brookings Institution. She also directs the Race, Prosperity, and Inclusion Initiative that does a lot of work on this particular topic. And you'll be hearing about some of the work that she's been doing specifically on Black boys and men. Dr. Joseph Marshall, who is the founder and executive director of Alive and Free, and also, as you heard, on the commission on behalf of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Mr. Ian Rowe, who's a senior fellow in domestic policy studies at AEI, and also founder and CEO of Vertex Partnership Academies. He holds an MBA from Harvard. And last and definitely not least, who we'll hear from first, is Dr. Marvin Williams, who is the program manager for the Commission on the Status of Black Boys and Men. What I want to do now is I just want to give you all a broad question, and then hopefully you all can answer this question within a few minutes, and then we get into some specifics. Now, we know that the commission is tasked with investigating the disparities of Black boys and men experienced in education, criminal justice, health, employment, fatherhood, mentorship, and violence, and then making recommendations on how to improve the social conditions that underlie these issues. These are some big and broad issues. So as people are hearing about all of these different outcomes, why do you think the commission is important, and what should be a primary and central focus area to address, at least initially, in terms of thinking about what's happening with the commission? So Dr. Williams, I'll start with you, and then we'll work our way around.
Excellent question, Rashawn. I don't even know how you have me go behind Senator Rubio and Chair Wilson. Somehow I don't feel as though that's really fair, but I'm going to do my best here to follow both of them. But excellent. I just want to say in preparatory comments, nothing happens for a reason. As I heard Chair Wilson talk about, Congressman John Lewis, I interned with him for 2 years. And that was a pivotal period. As the time he was a young congressman, really making his way through Congress, and the impact that he has had on my life is tremendous, really tremendous. And I am just honored, that Director of Staff Mauro Morales, hired me into this position. and here I am today to kind of talk about your very, very question. First thing I want to say, this commission not only has a national scale, it has a global scale. As you can see what's happening in Europe, even in Ukraine, you can hear what's happening throughout the world, happened in Venezuela, Central America, South America, regarding Black men and Black boys. This is not just a national issue. We are actually leading a global front. And I believe that's why it's so critical for us to do this well and for us to do this right, because I believe it's going to have an impact. It's going to have the ripple effects are going to actually go throughout the world in what we're doing here in the US. And this is, as you already heard, it's a nonpartisan federal agency. And the commission leads, this commission leads in a national discussion to address the complexity and nuances of the varying conditions affecting Black males in the history of America's cultural landscape. In doing so, we want to conduct a systematic study of the conditions affecting Black men and boys, including homicide rates, arrest and incarceration rates, poverty, violence, fatherhood, if you've heard mentioned, mentorship, drug abuse, death rates, disparate income and wealth levels, school performance and all grade levels, including post-secondary education and college. And as Chair Wilson mentioned, health issues. So we want to really examine, the trends. And you heard Chair Wilson talk about legislation. We want to examine the trends regarding Black males and report on the community impacts of relevant government programs that you kind of heard Senator Rubio talk about a little bit there within the scope of these topics. So, and proposing these measures is critical because we want to alleviate and remedy the underlying causes of the conditions described in the statute, which may include recommendations of changes to the law, recommendations for how to implement related policies, and recommendations for how to create, develop, and improve upon government programs. So as you said so well, it's broad, very, very broad, but we want to narrow down, not only short-term, but long-term. One of the things that we're going to be discussing, in our upcoming meetings is talking about a long-term strategy, for the commission, what that means in long-term, taking advantage of what Chair Wilson mentioned so well, these partnerships that we will find throughout our country, because we are in partnership, because it is an American issue. It is not an African-American or Black issue that we're talking about. This is fundamentally an American issue. And it started all the way from slavery and is pushed on to where we are now. And so this is our time. This is our moment to make concerted change in our country for Black men and boys across the board in every segment of where you find disparity in our institutions, in our law enforcement, in every segment of society. That's what this commission endeavors to do.
Yeah, thanks for that. Camille, in thinking about the importance of the commission and these short and long-term potential avenues, what are your thoughts on this in terms of the importance of the commission and maybe where some of the foci should be, either initially or long-term?
Sure. Thank you, Rayshawn. And thank you for having me in this very important conversation. It's really humbling to go after Senator Rubio and Representative Wilson, as well as Dr. Williams. What I will say is that the commission is going to be extremely important to transforming this nation. It's going to be very important that a commission with the kind of bully pulpit that it actually has be able to release data and solutions and leverage that national platform to ensure that the kinds of approaches, programs, policies, et cetera, that are recommended are understood by all Americans as benefiting all of us. And in addition, as Dr. Williams has already said, this does have global ramifications. The US is not the only place that is struggling with the position of men and boys of color. We have held an event last spring where we talked about this in its relevance to France, which is an an area, a country that has struggled with this issue as well. So I think there are a lot of global implications, and we will be a reference point for other countries. So what I would say is, that the most important part of the exercise here is not only the data collection, but also the generation of solutions. And the sort of problems we're talking about, that were mapped out there by Dr. Williams, are problems that are very large scale. And up to this point, the kinds of solutions that we've been having are small scale solutions. They are programs, well-intentioned. Some of them are successful, some of them are not, like mentorship, et cetera. But when we're talking about, tens of millions of people, right, you have to have a solution that is commensurate with that scale. And that is why it's really, really important for Congress to follow through on the recommendations, whatever they may be, because Congress and federal government is really the only place where you can get that kind of scale and therefore that kind of transformation. So I would say that's going to be really important. The second thing is, one of the things that I think really should be an anchor for this commission is, what does it mean to experience well-being when you are an American Black boy or Black man? And when we think about well-being, generally when we have that conversation in the US, we're thinking about health status and mental health status, but it's always, the reference point is always white people. And so what we need to do is figure out what's that definition of well-being that is defined by us, for us, about us, and what does that mean? And I think that is going to be an important place for the commission to anchor its recommendations, whatever those might be. So I do think that there are a lot of opportunities here to be pretty pioneering and to be transformative and to really leverage the power of the federal government to address the scale of the issues that we just talked about.
Yeah, thanks, Camille. I want to bring Ian into this conversation. So Ian, thinking about what you've heard and thinking about, of course, these broad scale type of issues to be addressed, which are many, and then thinking about what are some of the policy solutions as Camille is doing, pushing us to really do a size fit there between the issues and the potential solutions. Where do you fall on this, and what do you see should be some of the main, at least initial primary pathways for the commission?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be part of this incredibly important conversation and commission. As you mentioned, I am a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, but for the purpose of this conversation, I think the fact that for the last 10 years, I ran a network of public charter schools in the heart of the South Bronx and the Lower East Side of Manhattan is very relevant, because we had 2,000 students, almost all Black and Hispanic students, almost all low income, and we had nearly 5,000 families on the wait list, desperate for the opportunity to send their child to a great school. You just start to realize that many of the families that were coming to us, their aspiration for their children, even if they faced discrimination in their own lives, was to have their kid have a great shot. In this particular district in the South Bronx, only 2% of kids that started 9th grade in 2015, 4 years later, graduated from high school, ready for college. So when we talk about disparities, we have to really think a lot about how can we start much earlier, because it's not surprising that we have disparities in wealth and all these other outcomes as adults when we see such poor outcomes coming out of K to 12. It's one of the reasons I'm actually now launching a new network of international baccalaureate high schools in the South Bronx starting this fall. And I think the thing this commission should really think about is, as much as we look at all of the dire statistics, our families want their kids to understand the strategies that they actually have that will allow them to pursue the American dream and be successful. How do we replicate success? So for example, there was a study a few years ago, Black Men Making It in America, that found that nearly 60% of Black men have made it to the middle class or higher. That was in 60% which was an increase from 38% in 1960. So the question is why? What were the factors that drove that level of economic success? Is it just random? Were there any elements that contributed to that wide scale success? And I think oftentimes when we talk about conditions facing Black men, it's very easy to descend into a defeatist narrative. While we have to address that, we also need to look at and recognize the success. And in this particular study, there were a few elements that were in common. The vast majority had finished at least their high school degree and had some post-secondary success. Full-time work, just they had learned the dignity and discipline of work. If they had had children, marriage first. Another element was a strong faith commitment. You know, we haven't talked a lot about the role of the church and faith. Not all of the solutions that we talk about will be policy-based. There will have to be faith-based and cultural-based as well. There's an element of the military, but one of the things that was most interesting about this study, you know, Black men making it in America, was that there was a sense of personal agency, that these men had a sense that even in the face of these structural barriers, they had the ability to overcome. And so it's just an interesting way that we have to incorporate the study of success in the large populations of Black men that have succeeded, while we're also looking at, you know, a lot of the negative narratives that we often focus on.
You know, Ian, that's a great point. I mean, thinking about the models of success become really, really important. And it's very easy to get caught up in some of, as you noted, some of the deleterious outcomes, but there are different ways to frame that, a deficit versus an asset-based model. And that's kind of a theme that we've been hearing about. Dr. Marshall, I want to bring you into this conversation, and I want to go bigger and then bring us back down, because essentially what's been highlighted over the past few comments really speaks to a big debate in the academic literature and policy and in public discourse about the role of structure versus culture. On one hand, research makes very clear the structural barriers that exist for Black men that others do not face. On the other hand, there are ongoing culture wars about the individual responsibility that Black men should assume. And this is often where crime, violence, and policing come into play. And of course, we know this is just one of your areas of expertise. Now, we know that Black boys and men experience a disproportionate amount of police use of force. However, we also know that violent crime is an issue in some predominantly Black and particularly low-income communities, which oftentimes are not mutually exclusive. And that's important to note that as well. But where do you fall on this debate, and how can the commission properly address it? Because one thing that I can see is with the 19-member commission, there are people coming with all different vantage points, different levels of expertise. You're trying to hone in on some policy solutions, but really one of the big elephants in the room is just differences in ideological approaches to what Black men should be doing.
Well, that's a good question. I'll do my best to answer. First of all, I've got to just thank, Speaker Pelosi for putting me on this commission. She could have picked anybody, she picked me. And I think one of the reasons I'm a direct service person, I work with first of all, I'm a Black male. That's all I do is work with Black men and boys. I've tried to frame this in a way that tries to make sense to a lot of people. In this country, Black men and boys have always been, from day one, swimming against the current. The current has always flows against us, right? Some of us have just become good swimmers for a lot of reasons. I learned how to swim in the current. You learned how to swim in the current. Marvin had to learn to swim. A lot of them are drowning because they never learned how to swim in this current that goes against them. And I think individually, I've tried to help young men learn how to swim, even though the current is going against them. And I think this is a chance on this commission on a large basis to do that. We were talking about policy earlier, and just before I get to your other point, policies in many ways have helped to exacerbate the current. The policies in the war on drugs, the mandatory minimum sentencing, the 100-to-1 crack cocaine conspiracy, also all help to create and continue this current. And at the same time, I'm a big believer that, a lot of Black men unwillingly collude in their own oppression. They do that. They just don't know. I have a saying with my young people and old folks: if you knew what I knew, you wouldn't do what you do. And so I'm big on history. I'm big on culture. I'm getting them to see the larger picture. I'm big on getting to see how they unwittingly and unknowingly contribute to the detriment of their own community. It's not a debate. It's not a either or. It's a both and. All of that is involved in that. I'm a big, and I myself as an individual, when I learned early about the big picture, it helped me to frame my work. Reading the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was a very young person helped me to see all that was going on here and how I could unwittingly, unknowingly just make it worse for my own. And so, I don't see it as a debate. I see it as part of all that has to be done. I'm a big believer in education. I have ideas about what works here, and I think that's what I bring to the commission. Now, if we can frame that in a policy piece, I think that's very excellent. But I think we got some pretty good ideas about what works and what needs to be done. So I don't see it as a debate. I see it as both things need to be done. And we'll make sure, and my job is to make sure that we do not unwittingly continue to contribute to that current moving downstream and drag us down into it also.
That's a very profound analogy to think about the current and teaching people how to swim and learning how to swim in stronger waters. And I always think about what is the source of the current? What is the source that leads to the current being different? And oftentimes we focus on the good swimmers instead of realizing that maybe it's important that it's okay to have average swimmers. We just need to ensure that they can actually swim in the same waters that everyone else is swimming in. It's kind of similar to the crabs in the barrel mentality. People always talk about crabs in the barrel, but nobody ever thinks that the barrel isn't actually the natural habitat of where the crabs are located. Nobody thinks to remove the actual barrel. And accordingly, when we think about this, we think about family being one of the primary sources by which people learn how to swim in the current or be in the barrel. And though research shows that Black men relative to other groups are more likely to engage in caregiving activities regarding bathing and quality of time with children. And oftentimes people don't realize that's the case, but we also know that Black men are much more likely to have non-marital births. And we heard Ian mention this a second ago. Ian, I want to quickly bring you back in. We received a range of questions about how existing laws and legislations concerning certain government benefits for mothers and children might actually inhibit Black men from living in the home. And I think really what people were getting at wasn't just thinking about child support and those sort of things, which was a big deal, but also the type of government benefits that are available, particularly for young families and young mothers. What are your thoughts on this, and how can the commission potentially address it?
Yeah, I mean, where you have situations where policy actually creates perverse incentives to deter things like marriage or work, or sometimes creates perverse incentives for non-marital childbearing, I hope the commission dives deep into this area, because frankly, it's an area of huge importance. And one thing I should say, because oftentimes when we talk about non-marital childbearing, we pathologize the Black community and not recognizing that the explosion in non-marital childbirth is now across the board. It's what I call an equal opportunity tsunami. So the growth in non-marital births in the white community is far greater than it has been even in the Black community, even though, again, percentage-wise, 70% of Black children are still born outside of wedlock. That said, the non-marital birth rate in the white community is at a level now where the raw numbers far exceed any other category. And you're starting to see the negative impacts of that when you look at deaths of despair, suicides, poverty, opioid abuse. So we should recognize that these issues that we're talking about are not solely focused within the Black community, because we don't want there to become this stereotype or perpetuate stereotypes that often follow in this kind of argument. The role of family, though, is fundamental. We just cannot deny the fact that if you look at the poverty rate in Black married families, for example, it's single digits, and it has been for decades. And so the role of marriage, the role of family, folks often look at, for example, the racial wealth gap. If you look at the 2019 survey of consumer finances, if you look solely just based on race, the wealth of the average white family is about $160,000 more than that of the average Black family. And for some, that's proof of America's history of racial oppression. But if you just take into account two other factors, family structure and education, the average married, college-educated Black family's wealth is about $220,000, which is about almost equally $160,000 more than that of the average white single-parent family. So that $160,000 wealth gap is literally almost reversed. And so all that says is that there are factors beyond race that can drive outcomes, and we just need to be part of the conversation. It's not, there's no silver bullet that just says, just get married and everything will be okay. But we can't ignore the fact that the raw numbers tell us that family structure is a significant determinant of economics, education, and a whole host of other outcomes that we care about.
You know, Ian, we really appreciate those comparisons. And as you noted, oftentimes people aren't making apples to apples comparisons. So it becomes important to do that, to think about what is it when we look at two-parent households that are Black and educated versus whites, and think about those gaps there. Camille, I want to bring you in because, and we're going to scale back up to talking about education and wealth. So just to tell people where we're going, then I'm going to get Dr. Williams back in as well. We heard Senator Rubio shortly ago speaking to social networks and mentorship. I mean, we also heard this from Congresswoman Wilson and their great work. You've done a lot of work, including Richard Reeves and others, showing the role of social networks and how they hamper the work opportunities for Black men relative to other groups. Can you share some of your main findings and how the commission might address these important gaps in social networks, which seems to span how we think about everything from role models, education and work at the top of kind of the socioeconomic hierarchy all the way down to the bottom?
Yeah, absolutely, Rashawn. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about that. I first wanted to say that the research we did in 4 different cities: Charlotte, San Francisco, Racine, Wisconsin, and Washington, D.C. And we interviewed people from all walks of life and all demographics. And what we found from that very extensive set of interviews about how you look for a job, how you find educational opportunities, and how you find housing opportunities is that in every single one of those cases in those cities, Black men were at a disadvantage relative to everybody else with respect to the number of people in their networks for finding these kinds of opportunities and the strength of those networks. So what was really kind of revealing, first of all, is that we had a hard time recruiting Black men in each of these cities. One might expect that to be true in San Francisco, where there are just not a lot of Black men, but we had that problem in Charlotte and we had that in Washington, D.C. And largely because Black men tend not to be very well networked. They, on average, have one person that they turn to for all of these opportunities. So what that said to us is that even if we were to create a situation where there are just lots and lots of opportunities like we supposedly have right now, right, in the sort of economic recovery, that Black men are not really able to access the networks that allow them to take advantage of those opportunities. We also found in this study, and this is probably as disturbing, is that that the networks associated with those kinds of opportunities are highly racialized in the US. And so we would not be, we're obviously not surprised by that, but what that means is that the resources and information about jobs, educational opportunities, housing opportunities, et cetera, actually those resources and information circulate within racial groups as opposed to between racial groups. So you combine that with the sort of social network relative to these kinds of opportunities. I'm not talking about, people you hang out with, but I'm talking, in terms of getting these kinds of opportunities. You've combined that sort of racialized network with the sort of opportunity isolation of Black men. You're talking about a really, really kind of a constrained set of options to move ahead and to be part of the mainstream economy. When we looked at the reasons behind this finding, we went kind of all the way back, and we looked at, the ways in which Black boys in particular are isolated and stigmatized from a very early age and pulled out of school and other kinds of systems that allow them where they would normally form these kinds of networks. And so there's a lot to be said about the downstream, sort of what's happening from preschool all the way up, that makes it very difficult for Black boys who later turn into Black men to have the kinds of robust networks that are necessary to access opportunities. So lots for the commission to think about and to strategize about in that space as well.
Yeah, most definitely. I want to try to combine a question that I want to give to members of the commission now to bring you all back in. And then I think hopefully we'll be able to do a quick round robin of some final thoughts. So we just heard some discussions about education and work, but of course, one of the big ones that was linked, and Ian brought this up, is dealing with wealth. We received a series of questions essentially stating that the piecemeal policy approach doesn't go far enough to address the elephant in the room, which is systemic racism, that kind of no matter what Black people do, they're swimming against the current. And then all of a sudden, they're being viewed as the tokens for swimming better in worse waters. And so people say that the systemic racism is what should be addressed. And of course, one big thing that's been gaining momentum is thinking about reparations. And we received a series of questions about that. And I'm curious kind of where the commission falls on that and how the commission thinks about education as well as trying to figure out a way to use it as a gateway for more wealth creation. So we'll start with Dr. Williams, then we'll go to Dr. Marshall.
Yeah, I would say Rep. Wilson probably is the best person to kind of talk about reparations. As you know, she had a conference, I should say a press conference a while back that she did talk about reparations. That has not come to the commission as of yet. And then maybe Dr. Marshall would like to say something more about that. But at this point, in my arena, in terms of planning, program planning, that has not come, to the commission. But I will say education that is at the top tier of the commission's priorities within the commission framework, addressing the areas of education across the board, not just very, very specific, but across the board. As somebody already mentioned, going back to that it doesn't just start at high school. When you get to secondary education, it starts well before that. Elementary school, where that Black boy has learned what ostracism really is. And then he takes that ostracism that has been cast upon him by his teachers, by his colleagues, and so forth. He takes that into high school, and that's where, or secondary education, that's where the rub hits. And then all of a sudden, now that person is a statistic, in talking about that 1 million men, Black men and boys that are missing from society. So education is key. It really, really is key. I think it's going to be fundamental. That's just my perspective. I think it's going to be fundamental for moving forward. I think that education train is going to have to be driven. You're talking about upstream. I really believe that education priority is going to be the one that's going to help people paddle, help people swim upstream against the stream, against all odds, to be able to turn that around significantly.
Yeah, yes. Dr. Marshall, go ahead with your thoughts on this question.
Well, reparations, that's interesting. I'm still waiting on the 40 acres and a mule. So, and I'm serious about that, because that goes back to Reconstruction. I'm not even going to go there because I give you a whole history lesson that I think everybody here knows. Look,
sometimes people don't know. Sometimes people don't know, but yeah, you're right. It's important. Sometimes people don't know.
Wealth disparity has been created by all of this stuff that has happened, since the 3/5 compromise. Okay. I don't know if reparations will happen. I'll take anything you give. If you want to do it, great. I'll take it. It can't hurt. Whether it would happen, we'll see. I know that certain cities have addressed it. They're actually addressing it right here in the city of San Francisco. And other cities have addressed reparations in their particular city. And I think this just shows all the issues that are involved here. We've gone all over the place because all of these impact the status historically and now of Black men and boys. So we'll see what happens with that. I don't know if this commission is taking it up. I'm sure it will come up as we move forward. But you can see we're tasked with a lot of things. Privately, people might say, you're crazy for taking it on in the first place. But we have to. education, huge. Education, huge. I mean, there's no doubt of us. Each of us are here today. Look at this, because education has helped us get here, right? It has helped us swim against that stream. And so I always say two things. Now, I'll end it like this. People ask me, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And I say, you can help Black men and boys become better swimmers against this current. And the other thing you can do is change the direction of the current so that we don't have to swim so hard. Those are the two things I tell people all the time. And that's exactly what I tell my young men. Pretty much the same thing. Reparations is part of changing that current. Whether that happens, all these things need to be done to change this current. If in fact we really want to do something, but this commission, you can see, is charged with a huge job. I have no doubt that we will do the best we can to craft some policies that cut into this disparity.
Yeah, great point. What I want to do now, because we are pretty much out of time, and I'm going to give you all a big task in a short amount of time. I essentially need a few seconds here, a few sentences, and nothing more. And being realistic, thinking about the work that this commission is tasked with and how long it's going to take for it to kind of change the tide and do the sort of things that we're talking about, get more people can swim faster and better, these sort of things. I like that particular analogy. Let's do a round robin. In 20 years, what do you hope the commission has accomplished, and what will be that proof? So let me start with Camille. I'll go to Ian, I'll go to Joseph, and then end with Marvin.
So in 20 years, I want boys like my son to be able to reach whatever their aspirations are without any interference whatsoever. I do think it's going to be important for the commission to focus on education, but in the following way, not to leave it to individual school districts who will water down and whittle down any sort of impactful solution, but to take an idea like reparations and figure out how you can apply it so that Black boys and Black men can get their just rewards within the educational system.
Yeah, bingo. Ian.
Well, first of all, thank you again. I hope that the commission recognizes both the structural barriers and the individual power that exists, and that there are institutions like family, faith, education, and then work that really matter. And that it shouldn't be the situation that right now, for example, in New York City, if you're in a district in the Bronx and you had a great idea to launch a school that would educate Black boys, you couldn't do it. That's one of the ways we ease the tide and change the current. Let's ensure every kid of every race has the power to choose a great school for their child. That's one of the biggest currents fighting against our kids today.
Yeah, most definitely. Joseph?
Well, it took 400 years to get this way. So if you're expecting 10 years, 4 years that we're going to do this, I think we can make significant progress because this is specifically focused on it. I think you've got some great people involved. The fact that it's bipartisan is certainly going to help. Let me just add this thing about education. It's not just education in schools per se. It's what is taught in those schools. What is taught in those schools. And the truth is not being taught in school. And until if you really want to improve educational outcomes, so if you got to teach the truth to young people about Black history, about Black culture, I think that's significantly important, because just putting them in a different school with a voucher, with everything else, and not having the truth told and taught at those schools is not going to help Black men and boys get the consciousness they need to continue to move forward in spite of what's around them.
Yeah, you all make some great points. Marvin, close this out.
Absolutely. And I think what we're going to see in 20 years, and as a program manager, I don't know if I'll be around for 20 years, but definitely would like to leave a legacy. And that is personal, community, and national transformation. That's what I would like to see. That's what I believe the commission will do, what we will see in 20 years in those three structural areas: personal, community, and national transformation on a scale that's unparalleled, that we have not seen in the last 400 years among Black men and boys.
Powerful words. And I think we look forward to seeing that happen. One thing that I'll say, obviously, at Brookings with this event, and particularly being led by Richard Reeves and his colleagues, they just put out a new piece what should the new commission on the social status of Black boys and men, of Black men and boys propose? Here are 32 ideas for starters that's come from Brookings Scholars. We know that you all be checking it out. We look forward to doing that work with you all. Look, this could have been a day-long conversation, and we know this is part of the beginning, not the end. We look forward to doing many things with this particular commission and helping in any way that we can. So on behalf of the Brookings Institution, we thank everyone for joining us, to Senator Rubio and Representative Wilson and the members of the commission and all the people who attended. Thank you. And let's hope in 20 years that we have some transformative action. Thank you all for attending today.
Great job.
Nice job, everybody. Great. Rayshawn, excellent moderator.